you know, it's only mainly going to be parents who need to ask questions, and that'll be good. Oh, alhamdulillah, we've got Rayan here today, Rayan Manhak. So,
Oh,
Rayan.
Yeah,
nice to have you here. We're going to be starting in about 5 minutes, but just do stay around in the background. If you have any questions in the meantime, if you look at the bottom, there's 2 ways you can ask questions. The best way is the Q&A speech bubbles that are at the bottom of the screen. You click on that and you ask the question, okay? And that's the best way to ask the question. And other than that, you can also ask a question in the chat function as well. Yeah, so that's there as well. So alhamdulillah, we're on YouTube live as well. I'm just going to get that link ready to be sent out to our parents, so they can see that as well. Yep, it's unlisted, so that's good. We're doing well with that. Okay. And also, Ustad Daniel, in the meantime, as we're just waiting for the next 5 minutes or so, you can also just familiarize yourself with the function here as well. So do take your time with that. Okay. Okay. Okay, so it's almost 5:35, and we did promise that we were going to start at 5:35. So inshallah, I think we will start. We are sending out the messages to parents as well, and we will see where it goes. We do have 1 participant on our Zoom account. And just to mention to those who are coming to us on YouTube, that if you would like to participate in the questioning, you can do that via the chat function on YouTube, or you can actually come on live as a panelist as well if you have anything to offer to add to what we're saying. We want this to be a good discussion on special educational needs, Islam, and madrasas. If you would like to be a panelist, please go to our website, and later on I will put a link as well to the page where you can have access to all our weekday sessions, which will be live, and you can participate as a panelist. You just need to register, which is literally a 20-second or 30-second process. Save the details onto your calendar, and you'll get a reminder for each session that you register up to whenever you want. So if you want every 10 minutes before, an hour before, you will get that as well. Okay, so I'm just gonna bear with me for a second, Sheikh, and then we will start in another few minutes. Just waiting for our message to be sent out to parents.
It's fine, no problem at all, inshallah.
Okay, just a minute, Sheikh, and we will do that. I will make this announcement again. Assalamu alaikum, Rayan. Once again, nice to have you here with us on as a panelist. And if any time you want to speak on your mic and want to be heard, do let me know in the chat, and I will then enable your mic and your camera if you like. But if you don't want to and you want to ask through text, that's also possible. Okay, so there's something on the chat. Oh, wa alaikum salam. Wa alaikum salam, Rayan. Okay, Sheikh, what we'll do, the message has been sent out to parents. So we're just going to wait for one more minute and we will begin. Okay. Okay, so alhamdulillah, on YouTube, we now have 13 people as well. So that's, they will ask questions there. If there's any questions from there, then I will stop you, Sheikh, and just ask you those questions if they haven't been answered before. If they have been answered before, we'll see if we can maybe summarize at the end. Otherwise, we can make this link available to those who are participating today. Yeah.
Inshallah.
Okay, so I think we'll start. So let's have a look. Okay, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Nahmaduhu wa nusalli ala rasulihil kareem. Amma ba'd. First, we'd like to say Jazakallah to our Sheikh Daniel, who is with us today. And he has given us his time from his busy schedule to be with us and to talk about a very, very important topic, which is special educational needs, so SEN. And alongside that, we're going to talk about special educational needs within the framework of madrasas today and broadly Islam as well, and how special educational needs fits in to the broader narrative of Muslims. So I am going to introduce Ustad Daniel. So Ustad Daniel has been our SENCO, so Special Educational Needs Coordinator at Fatima Elizabeth Frontistery for about, it's been over 2-3 years now. And Ustad Daniel,
2016.
yeah, and Ustad Daniel, he mainly he doesn't teach a specific class, although you would probably see him walking into many classes because Ustad Daniel works with students who require, who have special needs, and Ustad Daniel works with them as well. And the way we see special needs is students who have qualities or a different way of looking at the world. They have a different way of, seeing things, which is a beautiful thing. And so this is something that Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he saw this, and that's why he was able to see the qualities within different companions and make, really polish them and take them out. He didn't change them. He gave them that confidence to be who they are in the Islamic framework and gave them those principles. And they were able to go and transform the world for the better. So this is how we see special needs. And we want to talk about this because it's a topic which I think madrasas specifically need to start dealing with now. And our next, month or two, however long we are here, we are going to be focusing on why special educational needs in the framework of madrasa is critical. It's very, very important for us to talk about this. And so myself, I'm a qualified teacher, but at the same time, right now, the head teacher of Fatima Elizabeth, Ustad Daniel, he is our special educational needs coordinator. So a lot of the parents would have seen Ustad Daniel in the office, spoken to him, also have had meetings with him, and also both of us together. So inshallah, without wasting any more time, I will pass it on to Ustad Daniel. This will be a format of some form of a discussion. So inshallah, Ustad Daniel, if you can maybe introduce yourself a bit more in terms of what you do during the weekdays when you're not busy at Fatima Elizabeth Frontistery, and also what you have been doing with the NHS, because you work for the NHS for their special educational needs departments, and also your your background and your educational background on what made you focus on special educational needs. Jazakallah. Over to you.
Jazakallah khair, Sheikh. So, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Essentially, I'm Daniel. I started off as a speech and language therapist, so that is my main profession. I've been practicing for a good 5 years now, alhamdulillah. And I graduated as a speech and language therapist from UCL, University College London, which was a 4-year course which looked at speech and language therapy in a whole, disabilities. So I'm a trained speech and language therapist, and that sort of is my core focus, if you like. I essentially got my first job in a private speech and language therapy company. And that gave me a vast range of experiences working in preschools, working with adults with learning disabilities, working with individuals who had perhaps stutters. I was exposed to working with people with strokes, for example, as well. So that was a good sort of foundation for me in my early years as a speech therapist. I then got a job at a local secondary school that had a deaf provision attached to it. So my main aim there was working on the speech and communication with students who had hearing impairment. That hearing impairment ranged from, being really, really severely deaf to being quite mildly deaf, but having really, really good communication skills. Going forward, I then joined a local secondary school and worked as a speech therapist there, and worked within the SEN departments there for a number of years, and also joined the NHS at one point for a short stint, where I am now, essentially, where I work in a number of mainstream schools within the SEN departments. And the students I work with range from students who have autism, social skills difficulties, moderate learning difficulties. There could be LAC children, so children who are looked after, which also has, they can also have a number of difficulties attached to that as well. Alhamdulillah, I think in 2016, Sheikh Hamid brought me over to Fatima Elizabeth Kate's Academy at the time, as it was called. And the idea was to have that sort of link where someone who had a little bit more focus would come into the classrooms, have a look at the kids who do have identified needs, support the teachers in terms of working with them when it comes to things like differentiating lesson plans, supporting parents with whatever needs that they might have with regards to sort of their own child's special needs. So that's really been my role at Fatima Elizabeth Kate's Academy, or FEP, as we call it now. Sheikh, I had a question for you. So I think you sort of touched upon it in your introduction a little bit. Yeah. What was some of the intentions behind providing SEN at Madrasah? Because really, it's quite a novel thing for madrasas and makatib, if you like, to really look at SEN. So what was behind it?
I think it's a whole range of things, including the fact that when we look back at the life of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and how he was with his companions, and the kind of qualities, rather than just what we term now as special needs, rather ways of looking at the world and experiencing the world in their own unique ways. Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was able to facilitate that, and not just to the point of facilitation and giving them some kind of career, but he went beyond that to change the world. And if we are to emulate Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in any way, then our madrasas and our madaris, they need to be at the forefront of understanding these needs. However, I felt at the time, and I'll tell you why I felt this, that what was happening was we were not only not at the forefront, we were way behind. To the extent where if any students had any kind of special needs, where to the teacher it felt that they were misbehaving, or they were not listening, or they were not doing their work, then in that case, what happened was they would think that they are, students who are not learning because they don't want to learn, or they are just rude.
Yeah, the naughty child.
The naughty child, exactly. Yeah, and that's not really the case. And then there came a point where students with autism, ADHD, students who were blind, also students who were hard of hearing as well. They started applying to our madrasa, and whenever we spoke to them, most of them were saying that, oh, no other madrasa or very few madrasas are taking us in. Now, it is difficult. It is a challenge to have special educational needs facilities in a madrasa, but I think if we try and follow the sunnah of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and how he sallallahu alaihi wasallam engaged with the various types of Sahaba and the qualities that they had, we don't need all these really big structured kind of special educational needs departments. We can try our best with the minimal that we had. So we had a student who was blind, from an early age, and he joined us once, and he was thanking us because every other madrasa said we can't help you. Now, obviously, we didn't have the kind of facilities at the time, but we tried our best. We thought, we will do whatever it takes, and we will do whatever's in our ability to work hard and not to give up. And I think that's the message for madrasas, and that's the message from us that, we're not specialists in this. But there's one thing that we can do is we can try our best, and we can
Put
go
in
as
that
far
effort.
as we can. Absolutely, yeah.
SubhanAllah, yeah. I think taking a step back a little bit, Sheikh, I want to really just talk about what are SEN, because I'm sure perhaps some of the listeners might not know what special education needs are. I mean, you touched upon it when you spoke about these individuals who might have a different worldview, or they might have different capabilities compared to sort of your typically developing child. And I'm just going to share my screen.
Okay. And as Ustad Daniel is sharing these, I would just like to also just mention that as Ustad Daniel's talking, I will be looking at your messages on YouTube and also on Zoom. And what I will be doing is I will be bringing them up as soon as I can. But if I haven't asked it just yet, don't think I haven't seen it. I am looking through the questions. So don't worry, they will be asked at some point. So stay tuned in, inshallah.
Sure. Can you see the screen okay?
I can see the screen, yep, and everyone else will be able to do that as well.
So perfect. So taking a step back, a child has SEN or special education needs if they have a learning problem or disability that make it more difficult for them to learn than most children their age. So if, for example, a child is 5 years old, and I'm going to take a sort of speech and language example here, if they're not really speaking in full sentences, if they're only reusing sort of key words or phrases, they might be maybe operating at more like a sort of 3-year-old level. That is what we call a special educational need, because they need extra support to help them with their schoolwork, their communication, in that particular example, or perhaps even the behaviour. I think, Sheikh, you really, I think, hit the nail on the head in terms of what we should be doing as a madrasa, in terms of why we should be catering for special education needs. From my perspective, I'm going to stop my video again. I feel like, as well as just sort of putting that effort in, it doesn't necessarily take that much effort from a whole perspective. So having a class teacher there to just set aside a bit of extra work, I think that's the sort of notion that people might have in their heads sometimes. And I think what teachers could do to sort of make things a little bit easier from one angle is just give students less work. So for example, if there's five questions that a teacher wants a student to ask or answer, the student can just the teacher can simply just ask them to answer 1 or 2 questions instead. That's the sort of thing which I think, in terms of a mindset or mentality, that's the sort of thing I think we need to sort of move towards, inshallah.
So, Ustad Daniel, just to elaborate on that further and to ask you, what you're referring to now is differentiation, I believe, right?
Specifically, yeah.
So in a classroom, when a teacher is teaching, that they have to think about every student, and let's go back to the life of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? In that case, there was a companion who we don't get to hear of much, and he asked Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam at a point, to the nearest meaning, that do you love me more than everyone else? And one of the reasons for this question was because anyone who came and spoke to Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he gave each and every one of them, right, the attention and focus, and took away everything else. This is just one quality of a teacher. So if anyone comes, doesn't matter, of their class, their social standing, it doesn't matter who they are, right? The attention Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave to them, that already had an impact on them. So differentiation, I think, is incredibly important. That yes, you have students who are academically more able, so they're good when it comes to dealing with text. They're good when it comes to dealing with writing. There may be other students and other humans who are not so good with that element. However, they may be more creative, right? They have a creative side to them. So what differentiation would be is, okay, how do I cater for the needs of every child? Now, initially, that may seem difficult. It may seem like you've got to do, 20 different lesson plans, but that's not always the case. Even if you're trying, you can, once you do one lesson plan and then something that works with each child, that is good. Sometimes, Ustad Daniel, there's, and we've noticed this in our madrasa as well, that when it comes to special needs, some students require more attention. And that's where I think our madrasas need to head towards. Okay, we may help certain students, but when it comes to autism, there's different scales and levels of that.
There's a spectrum,
yeah, there's different spectrum. So how do we help students?
Like a line.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do we help students who require more attention? So I think that's where every madrasa should think about having a special needs coordinator. And now, alhamdulillah, where we're living now, there are many Muslim special education. And the only reason I'm saying Muslim, is because it's a madrasa setting, and they will understand the needs, our cultural needs and religious needs, possibly better than non-Muslim senkos. And there are many Muslim senkos out there. So Jazakallah for the differentiation aspect. Do carry on, Sheikh. Sorry to take.
No. I think you've elaborated really quite well on sort of the angle that I was looking for, in terms of why it's so important. If I can go back to my screen again, inshallah, and share. Can you hear that, Sheikh?
Yep.
Yeah. So again, the example here was actually a training which I did specifically for speech and language communication needs for one of the schools that I was in. But one of the things which I thought was particularly relevant for Muslims within the UK and madrasas. So 60% of young people in young offenders institutions have communication difficulties. And I mentioned this in one of the trainings that we did for WFCOM quite recently. That's Waltham Forest Council of Mosques. If we look at the percentage of Muslims in prisons, it's 15%, or in 2016, there was 15% of Muslims in prison. I'm not sure that was 4 years ago now. That percentage might have gone up since then. But the reason why that's so surprising is because the general population of Muslims in the UK is only about 4%. So there's a big disparity in terms of the amount of Muslims in prison and the Muslims that are in the UK. And the fact that 60% of young offenders had some sort of communication difficulty suggests that we as a Muslim community aren't doing enough to cater for these young people. And it was one of the main sort of factors in terms of why I joined Fatima Elizabeth. I wanted to sort of give something back in terms of using my own knowledge, whatever little knowledge that might be, and to help into helping some of these young Muslims. I think another worrying fact as well, Sheikh, which I wanted to highlight, as well, and perhaps you might be able to elaborate on this, is that there's a number of very sad stories as well about Muslims with disabilities or SEN who have then left Islam because their needs haven't been catered for. I think specifically within the deaf community as well, if you think about Islam being a very oral religion, there are a lot of case studies of Muslims being sort of feeling isolated within their own community. It's quite interesting, actually, specifically thinking about the deaf community. They have their own sort of culture and traits within amongst themselves. They're quite separate in some ways to how sort of the hearing community, if you like, would be. So it's a sort of isolation within isolation. If you think about a Muslim being within the deaf community and then sort of being further isolated from their own culture, it's quite worrying if you think about it. That aside, I think if you leave deaf Muslims aside, I think across the board, Sheikh, it's quite a worrying issue.
No, absolutely, and there's a lot of stories that come to us as well, to our madrasa. So when we have many students with various needs who come, and then parents describe some of the difficulties and challenges they've faced when they've taken their children to various different madrasas. Just to give you one example, where and I won't mention the name of the student. So when we started our madrasa, this was in December 2014, so just over 5 years now. So he was a student. When we spoke to him, he was a teenager, and we sat down. We had good times, and he mentioned that he had been to most of the local madrasas, and the previous one he had been thrown out because ultimately there was a altercation, and he swore at the teacher, and then he was thrown out, or he left. Now, this student, it's always about trying to understand the world from the context and the worldview of the children who are living now and here, and that's both even the teenage phase that they are going through. I think that and I think that's something that may not be seen in special needs, but I think in a way, these teenagers are going through a difficult time. It's probably not as easy as it was for us. There's the whole thing about internet. There's there's so much more going on for them, and we need to understand that. So this one child, I remember, there were certain things that happened, and we overlooked, and most important thing, I think, amidst special needs and all of that, is the quality of rahmah from Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What we learn, and the verse of the Quran that ruhama'u bainahum, that the companions, they were compassionate and merciful amongst themselves. And this becomes much more important for a teacher or any adult dealing with any children, and that's regardless of special needs or not. So I remember this student, he slowly began to enjoy the madrasa, and within a few months, I remember he being the very first student standing by the door. Even before the teachers used to come, he used to stand by the door and wait for the teachers to come and ask the teachers, how can I help you? What can I do to help you? Because ultimately he gained the trust of teachers. He began to trust these adults in the madrasa. And I remember one interesting anecdote to do with the same student. There was going to be this radio show about a certain denomination within Islam, and they wanted me to participate, and I said no, I don't believe that I'm in line or in tune with any particular kind of specific denomination. So I did say to them, look, our madrasa's policy is we're always, our doors are open for everyone. You're more than welcome to come. So a journalist came from BBC, and we were taking them from one class to another. And when we got to that class, that same student, he was walking around in the classroom. We don't force our students just to sit down in one place for the entire 2 hours. We allow them that space, in the classroom. So the journalists, we allowed them to speak to students, and journalists came to this student and asked him, how do you feel in the madrasa? How is it different to your school? And what he said was that in school, he's always under stress. Okay, he's always under stress because you're on this level. Okay, you need to get to this level, and in order to do that, you've got to do this. Okay, which is good, but then multiply that by the amount of subjects you have. Multiply that by the amount of topics you have. And then what happens is it's a top down, isn't it? It starts with the government, and then it goes to Ofsted, and then it goes on to the head teachers and the CD leaders, and then the teachers. And who's crushed right at the bottom? It is the students.
The students,
So,
absolutely.
yeah, and is that the best way we should be learning? That's one thing. But anyway, with this student, he mentioned that when he comes to Fatima Elizabeth Frontistery, for him, he feels at ease. He feels happy, and he feels that he can be himself and relax and learn in a relaxed environment where he can take in everything. So, and that, the journalist was taken aback. So some of these comments were also came up in an article. But I think underlying the key thing when it comes to special needs, we can put so many structures and so many things in place, but what is key is compassion. What is key is what's here for the students. We need to have that love for the students, as Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam taught us. And if we can make that the foundation, I think we don't need to spend and we don't need the millions of pounds that are pumped into the economy. We can try our best. So I can't remember what the question was, Chef.
I can't remember either, Chef.
Okay.
But just on that about millions of pounds, just in terms of context, actually. So a student who has an identified SEN may end up with an educational health and care plan.
Yeah.
So that is essentially a legal document that states what that child is entitled to. So for example, it might say that child X is entitled to having one-to-one for 25 hours of their week, for instance. Now, us as a madrasa, we are not privy to that funding. So that school who has that school who has that child on their books will then get funding to support that EHCP. But we as a madrasa would not get that funding because we are exclusive from it, if you like. So what we are essentially doing the best that we can with the limited resources that we do have. Just to touch upon something else you said there, Sheikh, about rahmah and compassion. One of the things which we have a sort of prerequisite for all our teachers whenever they plan their lessons, and I think some of the parents who saw some of the lessons over the weekend probably just see how much planning goes into one single lesson plan. But one of the prerequisites that we do have is that there's some catering or some aspect where the teacher will look at for the students who have SEN in their classroom. So part of my job at the madrasa is just to have a quick read through the lesson plans to see whether that child is being differentiated from that perspective.
Jazakallah Sheikh, there's a question that's come from Liba on our Zoom. So
I just saw it.
There could be a number of Libas, but so I'm just guessing it might be one of our students.
Potentially,
sure. Yeah. So the question is, Salam, I totally agree with this. Apart from religion, we are struggling with socialization. The older they get, the harder life gets. So that's students with special needs there, and depending on the type of special needs, the older they get, the more, because I think one important point here is that, when they're in primary school and secondary school, potentially college, they are getting some form of help in terms of special needs. When they get older, what happens to that help that they are receiving?
Yeah, Sheikh, just intercede. I think there's an expectation from society for these students to then automatically become more independent.
Right.
And straight away, if you look at the transition from primary to secondary school, the idea is, okay, they'll go to their classes as per normal, going to number of classes, going to maths, going to music. But then for a child who's autistic, for example, in primary school, they've always had that one teacher teaching all their subjects in that one classroom without having that movement. That transition to secondary, that routine goes completely out of the window. It's a massive step for a child with autism, because or any child for that matter, but even more so if a child who does have ASD or is on the spectrum, because they're so entwined or closely following these routines, if you like, that it becomes much more difficult for them. So I think it's a really important point. And just as they progress through the years as well, they could still be functioning at a much younger age, if you like, But by the time they get to sort of sixth form level, or by the time they're expected to leave school, then it's almost as if, okay, what now for these kids? You know, they are at an age where they're sort of 17, 18, yet they're still functioning on a much lower level. So I think if we're going sort of a step backwards, if you like, Sheikh, even at a more societal level, there's a big problem. I think there's a big hole there, if you like.
And this is where we, absolutely, and this is where we need to have these discussions with the wider community on, as Muslims, not only, you know, as Muslims, this is actually part and parcel of our faith, right? Where Prophet is being commanded about ruhama'u bainahum, or he's being, you know, this description of the companions as merciful and compassionate with one another. How do we now, in this modern context, understanding special needs better, how do we kind of facilitate that? And this is where I think it's important that those of our parents and viewers and listeners to come forward and talk about this. So this is ultimately a discussion on how to move forward as a community for our children. And then I think it's important that, you know, when we say our children, yes, that's primarily Muslim children in this context, because it's the madrasa context.
But the greater society.
But the greater society. And that's what...
Absolutely,
because Prophet ﷺ has been described as Rahmatul lil Alameen, as a mercy for all of mankind, of all mankind. So this is something important. There's some questions that have come up. So Laiba, I hope that has kind of, you know, shed some light on where you come, and Jazakallah for bringing that up as well. There's some things on
YouTube
that I wanted to mention. So there's a few parents who have said Jazakallah for hosting this. So Barakallah feekum to all of you. So a comment has come saying Waltham Forest Council has voted in favor of cutting the funding for special educational needs children. That may have an adverse effect on the children who might be coming to FEP. How are you preparing to deal with that? So that is a good point. And now, first of all, you know, we'll need to know a bit more in detail on what kind of parts are cut. So, for instance, you know, the way we benefit from the schools being funded is the you know, the special the lesson plans, the individual learning plans that the
ETPs, I think, the ETP specifically,
if it impacts that, so what that does is we can no longer, so we cannot pay for something like that. We do not have the finances in place to enable you know, children to have that, you know, special learning plan or individual learning plan. So what we do is we tend to ask parents to provide us with the one that the school has prepared, which costs, you know, which ultimately would cost the council thousands of pounds. So that would have an impact, because we can no longer then pass that on to
the teachers.
Because remember, with our madrasa, a lot of our teachers, they are learning as they go ahead. Not everyone is a qualified teacher, but again, in that framework of compassion and trying their best for the students, they would look at that individual learning plan, and then from that they would plan their lesson and differentiate. So that is one of the ways that you know, where we would be impacted. But also, we do have parents come to us and say, look, I think my child needs more attention. I think they need help. However, my school is not doing anything about it. I've been to them so many times.
And this is where I would potentially come in. And because I'm a registered health and care professional, I can come in and provide perhaps a specialist assessment from the madrasa's perspective, and do sort of onward referrals to sort of agencies and say, actually, this child, we've identified this child as having a certain need. We think you should therefore take a closer look at this child. For example, he might need an educational psychology assessment, for example, or his hearing might need to be tested. And I have a lot of these discussions with these parents, often actually, to saying, you know, these teachers aren't, or schools aren't supporting their kids in the best manner. So we can try and support from that perspective.
Yep, definitely. So I hope we've answered that question. So there will definitely be other ways. It's a very broad question. It depends on what part of the funding's been affected, and that would have an impact on us, because we do tend to work with parents to, you know, help us as well with all the data that we can get in order to help our teachers, who will ultimately help your children. So for us, it's the happiness of the children. And ultimately what we say is, by the time a child leaves a madrasa, whether they have certain special needs or not, they leave the madrasa with the love of Allah and the love of Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the confidence to say that we are confident Muslims. Okay, this is key. Another question that's come on YouTube is, what would differentiation look like at FEP in your classroom? So that's a good question. So again, I think firstly, when it comes to the actual text and things like that, our teachers do differentiate on their lesson plan for students with special needs. And then that's also checked by Ustad Daniel, who's here with us. What he does is not just about checking and observing and looking and that's it. What Ustad Daniel does further is he would, the purpose of, our purpose of looking at lesson plans and observing lessons is to actually ensure that students, the lessons are being differentiated for them. But not just that, but how can we help our teachers more? How can we help our teachers to further differentiate? How can we, pass more details on to our teachers about certain special needs? So it's always going to be a dialogue as opposed to a one-off special educational needs training and your box has been checked and it's ticked and it's done. And we can say we've trained our teachers. That's not enough. Training, actually, it's got to be ongoing. It's got to go on every single week. We've got to be learning as we are teaching, and teaching as we are learning. And, it works both ways. So it would look, differentiation, that's how it would look like. Visually, it will be Ustad Daniel going and checking up on teachers, on students, seeing how they are. If they need to be, yeah.
To go in on that question, Jeff. So when I do look at sort of lesson plans, I'd look to see whether the teacher is using things like visual aids. So certain learners might be more visual learners. So is that teacher differentiating and putting in pictures rather than having too much writing? Is there less writing as opposed to, or is there less writing as opposed to just loads and loads of text in their PowerPoints, for example? Is a task for a certain student broken down into chunks? Are they expected to do perhaps 3 questions rather than 5 questions? That's the sort of thing that I'll be looking at when I'm looking at a lesson plan to see whether that child has been catered for from a particular angle, if you like. Other things which I might look at if we're looking at things like qaida, tajweed, for example, has a teacher sort of designated the use of a e-maktab pen, for example. So we have these reader pens in our madrasa that would read the letters for the student. Is the e-maktab pen as a resource being used efficiently or appropriately? Those are the sort of things that I'd be looking at when I look at a differentiated lesson plan, inshallah. I hope that answers the question from that perspective.
Yep, just to follow on to that, the Sister Zahida Ahmed is asking, so the question, what would differentiation look like at FEP? So the point was, she said, not necessarily of the data, or i.e. cuts meaning the behavior of the child can deteriorate and their emotional needs are affected. I was interested more in that. How would you cater for their needs?
All right, so essentially if, for example, there's a greater impact on that child, if, for example, they're not getting the one-to-one at school. One particular example actually comes to mind, quite recent example. One of our SEN TAs, so one of the TAs was working quite closely with me, who's had some SEN training, was working with a child whose behavior was deteriorating, and the school wasn't taking his needs seriously. And there were a number of factors. He wasn't a looked after child, but parents had divorced and split up. There were some elements of trauma involved in that case. But what our TA did in that scenario was build that rapport with that student, so really got to know him as an individual and as a child. So she found out, for example, that he really loved Lego, and this was a child in his Islamic studies and in his qaida lessons. He was literally just running around, and it was really hard for the teacher to manage his behavior. So the SEN TA came in, found out what he liked. He really loved Lego. He really loved building things. So from her perspective, she wanted to gain his trust, brought in some Lego to slowly build up that relationship and rapport. And then really slowly started to include him in to make him feel a bit more special, a bit more important, to feel that rahmah, as you mentioned, Sheikh, if you like. And she actually built a fort with inside the classroom as a sort of special place for him to go to. And I think the other students in the classroom were quite accepting of that. This was this child's space. We're not going to impose ourselves on it. That's for them. And I think the child, in essence, felt a lot more comfortable, a lot more happier coming to madrasa than they did school. So these are the sort of things which we'd look out for. We'd really try to sort of build up that rapport and have that rahmah, as you mentioned, Sheikh, for that child. Hope that answers the question.
Inshallah, yeah. And we have gone over time, so we will try and work towards wrapping. And I don't think we even started our session, Sheikh. We had this discussion. So that, and
I think yeah, we looked at sort of in terms of what are SEN. I think we touched on the base upon that. We looked at in the needs in terms of the intentions. Why should we be looking at creating towards SEN from a Islamic perspective? So I think we've done a good start in terms of just introducing this.
Absolutely.
Alhamdulillah.
I would definitely agree. And just to show that, look, there is so much to talk about. There is so much to work on. There's so much to do for us. And I think in these times now, and in this kind of in this isolation that we're in, I think this is the key moment to break through and break past all of that, and to have a future which is different. Okay, to have a future where we think about, look, how can we go back to the principles, the principles of compassion and love and care and kindness that Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave us. Right? We need to go back to that and then come back to the issue of SEN and work within that framework under the principles of that Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gave us. So I think that's incredibly important. That madrasas not only need to facilitate for special educational needs, but beyond that, to do it from here where it counts most, and not for it to be just a tick box, and not to just count on or make it just attached to finance. There are more ways to go beyond that, and I think that's something that we as madrasas have to work on, and we as madrasas have to facilitate for every single one of our students. Because Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he did say, "An-nasu ma'adin kama'adin al-dhahabi wal-fidda," that people are like mines, like the mines of gold and silver. And it's our job as teachers and educators, and especially in a madrasa setting, to find the gold and silver hidden away in our students. And as we say, even someone like amongst some of the greatest thinkers, many of them, they had special educational needs, but then once they were able to click and able to express and find a way to deal with the world around them, they were able to change the world for the better, not just themselves or the people around, but the whole world. And that's what our starting point is. And if we look at Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, the way he worked with his companions, the way he differentiated things for the companions, I think it's for us to learn from that. And at the same time, to look at, and Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, he told us to look at the most relevant thing of the time. Okay, and just as a hadith, for instance, about medicine, that there's no illness or disease except that Allah has created a cure that comes down with it. It's our job to find that. And I think that's where people like yourself, Ustad Daniel, are very important, because you're doing that in a different context, like with special educational needs. So it's important that people like yourselves, and there's many more of yourselves out there, not just in our borough of Waltham Forest, but in other boroughs where there's a lot of Muslim students who go to madrasas. I think special Senkos need to, if they are not being approached, then they need to approach the madrasas and say, look, what kind of special needs do you have? We want to help out. We want to be here for the students. We want to help out in the best way we can.
I just want to point out, if there's any more questions that people think of for the future weeks, we can try to look at that in future webinars, and then we can try and address that as we're sort of having this discussion.
Yes, inshallah, definitely. And just to, as we wrap up now, I just wanted to mention that we do have a, and I put this up on YouTube as well, the link to our weekly sessions. We have different sessions throughout the week, different session every single day by different people. You're more than welcome to register for free. And if you register, then you can join us on the actual Zoom as a participant. So you can ask us questions directly there. If you don't want to do that, that's fine. We will be sharing links of this every week. But as you know, the YouTube links will be different every week. So it may so happen you may not receive it or whatever. But if you register, you can join us directly on the webinar. We can have up to 500 people. So please, and I think it's incredibly important that we talk about this topic. For us, this discussion, we're having this discussion because we feel that it's not being addressed as it should be, as a Muslim ummah as a whole, especially for our children. Because remember, when our children are adults, they have a choice. Okay, and that choice is Islam, or that choice is a secular, atheistic, way of life. So they have those two choices. Now it's for us to do whatever we can to so that we facilitate that choice so it goes towards Islam. And we need to embody that amongst ourselves first in more detail, which just goes beyond just the necessary prayer, just the necessary worship. Because for us, every second of our lives need to be worship, and everything that we do, we need to make sure that is worship. So that's from me. And oh yeah, another point I wanted to just mention: if there are any PowerPoints that we will be putting up, if you go to that same link that I have sent on YouTube, if you click on that, there will be a new button that will come up under this part of the timetable on special needs. And if you click on that, you'll be able to download those resources after the sessions as well. So that will be there, and you can use them, spread the news. That's key. And remember, da'wah is not just calling towards Islam, but also amongst Muslims. It's important to call towards the teachings of Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam in every aspect of our lives. Would you like to give us any last pointers before we leave, Sheikh?
I think you summed it up beautifully, Sheikh, in terms of taking this further forward, and it's an ongoing discussion that I think people who are tuning in can definitely contribute towards. And I really want to thank the people who sent in questions or comments to us today. It really helped the discussion go forward, because I've been working for a good 5 or 6 years now, and I've got so many cases and so many stories to share, which I think these questions and comments will really help come out, if you like, of my brain. So jazakallah to everyone who's tuned in.
Barakallah, that's great. Jazakallah. I'm just going to turn off the YouTube live. So jazakallah for all the YouTubers out there. Inshallah, we'll see you next week on Monday, same time at 5:30. This session will be between half an hour and an hour at most. And we'll see you next week. And do come back with any questions. If you have children with special needs and you have any questions, Ustad Daniel is the right person to answer that. So jazakallah for taking part, and jazakallah for your questions. Difficult questions, bring them on. This is the platform. If we can't answer it, if Ustad Daniel can't answer it, inshallah the following week we'll try and get the details from the relevant experts, inshallah. Jazakallah, YouTubers. Assalamu alaikum.